Hello there, friends. It's Jimmy Maverick. Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Maverick podcast. And today we are going to talk about Week 7 matchups as well as starts and sits for this week. It looks like there's a couple of games that look to be just awesome fantasy football games, and then a couple that are probably going to be fantasy football duds. So you definitely want to stay tuned for that. And here we go.
Listen up. It's time for the Fantasy Maverick podcast, starring the guy who's going to help you win that fantasy championship, Jimmy Maverick.
Hello there, friends. It's Jimmy Maverick. Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Maverick podcast. And normally I am joined by Swami Rob, and we actually did a full podcast together. But then what happened was after it was done, it turned out that it did not record our meeting. So I apologize to Swami Rob, but we are going to redo the podcast today, give you all the information on the Week 7 matchups as well as starts and sits. And, of course, we will have Swami back with us next week. So in the meantime, let's just get right to it. Now, I got to tell you, man, it has been a tough year for me for fantasy football. I'm like, why? Why are my teams all struggling so bad? It's not like they're bad teams with bad players, and I've had a lot of injuries. I've actually scored pretty well on my points, but I was looking yesterday after Week 6 went down, and in every single one of my leagues, I have either had the most points scored against me or the second most points scored against my teams. It is just unbelievable. I mean, I've got, as an example, this past weekend I had a team going into Monday night. I was up by like 3 points projected against my opponent. And I was like, okay, I pretty much got this. I got Patrick Mahomes still to play. I'm like, I think I'm going to be just fine here. Well, turns out that two of the players that my opponent had, which hadn't played yet, were Kenyon Drake and Christian Kirk. And between those two guys, they scored 60 points. 60 points on Monday night. And of course, I lost by like 40. I'm like, what in the heck happened? But this is like par for the course. So we'll see what happens. But I mean, it doesn't matter how many points I score. I got people dropping 160, 170, 180 points a week against my teams. I just like can't compete against that. It's just one of those things. It happens. It's a part of fantasy. It is very frustrating, but I'm hoping things do turn around because these teams are all pretty good. They all deserve to be playoff contenders, at least in playoff position, but it's not happening right now for sure. So let's get on to the playoffs. Let's get on to Week 7. And we're going to start with the Thursday night game, man. I got to say, Giants at the Eagles, the NFC least is at it again, the saddest division in the NFL for the second year in a row. I'm looking at a low wattage, low scoring game here. Not a lot of starts. I do like some of the receivers. I like Darius Slayton. I like Fulham on the Pittsburgh side, but on the Philly side. But I got to say, man, not a lot of starts to be had here. I do not like Devonta Freeman. Philly is top 10 against the run. I don't like Carson Wentz. Giants are top 5 against the quarterbacks. So again, I do not see a lot of fantasy production happening. Obviously, Boston Scott's a start just on the volume as Miles Sanders isn't going to be playing. But there's not a lot that's going to be happening fantasy-wise here for the Thursday night game. So just go with that. Now let's move on to the Sunday games, and we will continue the NFC least matchups as we've got another divisional matchup of the Cowboys at the Washington football team. By the way, there's a total of 5 wins between these 4 teams so far this season. So not great. Another crappy game from teams that have combined for 3 total wins here. Cowboys at Washington football team. Cowboys are bottom 10 against the pass. So Terry McLaurin and Logan Thomas, the tight end, is a good streaming option if you're looking for are looking for starts there. I do feel good about starting most of the Washington players. I think they're good this week. Obviously not the quarterback. Would not start the quarterback even as a streaming option. But on the flip side, I think Andy Dalton is a good streaming option this week. Obviously, he had a tough matchup last week. It's not surprising that he did not do well. He should be better. Arizona is top 10 against quarterbacks, but Washington is bottom 10. So it should be a much better game for him. I think he's a good streaming option. And the only Cowboys receiver that I would sit is Michael Gallup, and it's just because he is way too inconsistent to trust, and more often than not, his volume has been on the low end of the spectrum. So he would be a sit for me as well. But one more start on the offense. I do like Dalton Schultz as the tight end. Washington is top 5 for opposing tight ends, so that should be good for him. Now, going from two of the worst games of Week 7 to one of the best, wow, 5-0 Steelers at the 5-0 Titans. Man, game of the week. I got to say, I'm very excited to see what happens here. One thing on the Steelers side, no sits. Good matchups all around. The Tennessee defense is not that good. So all the Steelers are starts this week. But on the flip side, the Steelers defense is brutal. Top 3 against the run. But of course, are you going to sit Derrick Henry? Nobody's going to sit Derrick Henry. You got to play Henry. But don't expect him to do a 40 points like he did last week. I would not expect that. Pittsburgh is also top 7 against tight ends. So I would sit either Jonnu Smith or Anthony Fursker, whoever gets the start. But Tennessee, otherwise, good to go. Start the wide receivers, A.J. Brown, Adam Humphries, Cole Davis, all looking good this week. So I would definitely start them. Going on to the next game, we'll call this one the beatdown of the week. Bills at the Jets. This is just a gift for the Bills. And when is Adam Gase going to get fired? What's it going to take for them to finally say that this is not the direction we want our team to go in? Just ridiculous. Obviously, all the Bills are a start. Bills defense, start everyone. But on the flip side, as far as the Jets go, the only player that you can comfortably start this week is Jamison Crowder. He's the only one. Just pathetic, man. The Jets are just, Are they an 0-16 team? They sure look like one, that's for sure. Now, next up, we got the Panthers at the Saints. This looks like a pretty good game, actually. I'm very excited to see what happens here. Don't be discouraged by Teddy Bridgewater's poor performance last week. It was a very tough matchup that he had. The New Orleans defense is much better for opposing quarterbacks. So I think Bridgewater is a great streaming option if you're in need of a quarterback this week. On the Carolina side, no sits, man. Everyone's good to go. Start them all. I think it's going to be a good week for all of them. And on the flip side, I got to say, man, the Carolina defense, no slouch. I thought they were going to be a total rebuild this year, but they've actually done very well. They are top 8 against the wide receiver and the tight end, and they're top 3 against quarterbacks. So that's really good. Of course, I would not sit Michael Thomas, who's expected to come back from injury this week, but I do think Drew Brees is probably a sit. Jared Cook, probably a sit also. But like I said, should be a good game. I'm looking forward to that one. Moving on, let's see here. We've got Packers at the Texans. I got to say, this one looks like a ground game battle. I love Aaron Jones and I love David Johnson this week. I think both are going to have really big numbers. That's the weakest part of the defense on both these teams is the run defense. So I think they're good. Now, Green Bay is top 10 against the quarterback and the wide receiver position. So I would throw real caution against starting Deshaun Watson or Will Fuller or Brandon Cooks, who's been really hot the past few weeks. If you can sit them, I would probably do it, especially someone like Cooks, as I think Green Bay is going to lock it down. But otherwise, everyone should be good to go this week. I kind of like all the matchups with the exception of that Green Bay top 10 defense against the quarterbacks and wide receivers. So go with that. Moving on, we've got the Browns, who were just embarrassed by the Steelers last week, but they get a much better matchup this week against the Bengals. So they should bounce back nicely. I do like all the Browns to start this week with the exception of Baker Mayfield, who, of course, is dealing with that shoulder injury anyway. And it just is not – it's not the kind of offense that's good for quarterbacks. So, Mayfield's probably, like, in general, a sit unless you are super desperate. Now, on the flip side, I love Joe Burrow this week as a streaming option for quarterbacks if you need one. Cleveland is top 10 for opposing quarterbacks. So I like that. And really all the receivers on Cleveland look good. So I think they are all starts. The only sit on the Cleveland side, I would say, is Joe Mixon, just because he's dealing with an injury. He's facing off against the top 10 run defense, and we're probably going to see more Giovanni Bernard than we normally would because of the injury issue. So Joe Mixon is probably the riskiest part of that Cincinnati offense. Now, moving on, we've got the Lions and the Falcons. This is one of my candidates to be the highest scoring game of the week. I love the fantasy implications of this game. Atlanta is bottom 10 against every fantasy position this year, so start everyone on the Lions. And Detroit is also bad against all positions except the tight end. So the only sit I can see from either team this week would be Hayden Hurst is a sit. But otherwise, everyone else is good to go. So start them. It's going to be a good fantasy game. That's all for the early Sunday games, but the afternoon Sunday games, man, another one. Fantasy primo matchup. Seahawks at the Cardinals. Again, another game that could very well be one of the highest scoring games of the week. One piece of advice I would give to people is if you have Kenyon Drake or Christian Kirk on your team, congratulations for what happened last week, but they are absolutely sell-high candidates. Try to move them off your team. Work them into some sort of deal to get them off your team because, especially Kirk, man, he got scored like 25 points, but guess what? He had 3 targets. He turned 2 of them into touchdowns, which is great. Good job, Kirk, but don't expect that to happen every week, and it's not going to happen, especially with that low of volume. So try to get him off your team. But the Seattle defense in general is terrible, so everyone on the cards is a start. Again, another thing you can say when you're trying to get rid of Kenyon Drake or Christian Kirk is that it's a fantastic matchup for them again this week. Good. Just try to get them off your team. And then on the Arizona side, they are top 10 against quarterbacks. They are top 5 against wide receivers. But come on, man. I am not going to sit Russell Wilson or either of the receivers, DK Metcalf, or why am I drawing a blank on the other one's name? I'm just, but anyway, I think they're good to go, but just don't expect a huge game out of them. Yes, it is going to be a tough matchup, but I do like them all for this week. So, moving on, we got the Chargers and the Jaguars. Again, another great fantasy game for people because both these defenses are bad. Chargers defense can't stop anyone. All the Jags are good to go. Jacksonville defense is also super bad. Everyone on the Chargers is a start. There could be a lot of fantasy points here. Justin Herbert, great streaming option for quarterbacks. And really, my only caution is if James Robinson can't get it done this week. He started out so strong, but the past 2 weeks, he has not done anything. If he can't get it done this week against this defense, I think you got to consider benching him, but probably try to move him, try to trade him to someone else. Next game, 49ers at Patriots. Now, this game I have inked as my lowest scoring game of the week. I do not think there's going to be a lot of offense on this team, on either of these teams. New England is top 4 against tight ends, top 5 against running backs. So I think George Kittle, very risky. Jerick McKinnon, very risky. You might be tempted. Obviously, if you have Kittle, you're not going to sit him. But McKinnon is a tough start this week. I would not expect much out of him, even with Mostert out. San Francisco, top 2 against running backs, top 10 against wide receivers. Edelman, White, Burkhead, Damian Harris, all those guys, man, I would sit them if you can. It is going to be a tough game. Who knows? Maybe this will be a game where the kickers are the best play on either of these teams. Moving on, we got the Chiefs at the Broncos, and Broncos obviously coming off that huge win. Great, a very emotional win, beating New England on the road. I thought they were going to get stomped. Did not happen, but don't expect them to do that to the Chiefs. The 1 point, though, on the Bronco defense, man, they are number 1 against the run. So I would not start Le'Veon Bell. Everyone's excited for Le'Veon Bell being on that team. I would not start him this week for sure. We kind of want to see his usage. He's probably going to get some goal line work and stuff, but I do not trust that he would even get enough volume to be fantasy worthy. CEH, he blew up last week. He had a great game. Do not expect that to repeat. If you have CEH, you're not going to sit him, but just know that you're going against the number one running defense in the league. But on the other side, this is going to be a passing game for the Chiefs, high-scoring game. Hill, Watkins, Kelsey, all great matchups, great starts this week, so I think they're going to be good. On the flip side, the Kansas City defense, where are they strongest? They're strongest against the receivers. So Judy, Hamler, Patrick, I would have as sits for this week. The last Sunday afternoon game is going to be the Buccaneers or the Raiders. This looks like a great game. I'm really excited to see what happens here. Start everyone on the Bucs. Great matchups all around. Love Ronald Jones this week. He's absolutely a start. And on the Raiders side, the only sit that I can recommend is Derek Carr, who would never really be a starter anyway in most leagues as he is a QB2. But everyone else on the Raiders, good to go. Start him. It's going to be a great fantasy game. So looking forward to that. And then the only other game that we got is the Monday Night Football. Only one Monday Night Football game this week. What the heck's going on? Bears at the Rams. Again, this looks like a low-scoring defensive struggle game. Two really rock-solid defenses. The Rams' D is top 7 against quarterbacks. They are number 1 against wide receivers. So Nick Foles is a sit. Anyone not named Allen Robinson is a sit on Chicago. On the other side, Chicago defense, top 2 against quarterbacks and wide receivers. So Goff, I wouldn't start. Woods and Kupp, very risky this week. They are top 10 against running backs. So Darrell Henderson, also a sit. Cam Akers, you can't trust him. Keep him on your bench. The only players that I can say to start on this game are the tight ends. Jimmy Graham on one side, Tyler Higbee on the other. Both have great matchups. I think they both look really good this week. That is where the primary point of attack is going to be for the offensive game plans. So look for both of them to have big games, but I would not start anyone else on these teams if you don't have to, except for maybe Allen Robinson, right? But that's it, man. That's 7. That's week 7. We're going to see what happens, man. We're going to see what happens. And if my streak of people scoring colossal amount of points against me on the week they play me will continue. We'll see. But it's not like I have any bad teams. I've been very good. Knock on wood. With the injury issue, I've had a couple of injuries, minor injuries that have kind of affected the teams a little bit, but nothing devastating like what, when you look at the players who are on injured reserve and stuff like that. None of that has really hit me this year. My teams are scoring pretty good on points. I'm usually around 4th, 5th, 6th in points in my leagues. So I'm doing, I've got good teams, but I just can't compete when someone scores 180 points on me or 170 points or 160 points. It's hard to compete against that. So we'll see what happens, man. See if things start to turn around in the second half of the season. I like my teams. They're good teams, but it's just it's brutal. It's brutal what happens when you have Christian Kirk score 25 points and Kenyon Drake score 35 points against me. I don't know. I don't know. What are you going to do about it? There's nothing you can do about it, right? That's part of what fantasy is all about. But I will be back next week with Swami. Again, sorry about the technical issues this week that somehow it did not record our podcast. We had a great podcast, but we will be with him next Thursday. Of course, I will have all the waiver wire targets on Tuesday as well, so stay tuned for that. And if you have any questions about any of these players, please leave a message down below. If I did not specifically mention a player, it usually means they're good to go. Start them. It maybe isn't the best matchup, but it's not a bad matchup. They should be fine. But that's kind of like my general rule. I want to just point out the guys that look like they have a great matchup or a terrible matchup this week. Those are the ones I focus on my starts and sits. So thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And if you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe down below. And we will talk to you again real soon. Have yourself a great fantasy week 7, everybody. Good luck.